Okay.
Right. Okay. So you are in charge.
Morning, Justice Williams. I think you're muted.
There we go. How's that?
There. Good. How are you?
Very good, thank you.
Good. So I think we are going to start in about 1 minute. We have you up at 9:50. So if you're able to log
Which is
on.
10:50 my time. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Sorry, that's the Eastern. Yeah. So if you're able to log on a little bit before then,
Okay.
that works for us.
All right.
And I am going to start the webinar officially. You're welcome to stay here if you're so inclined, but
Okay, so if I stay here, then I'm good. I don't have to log.
yeah, it will be the other presentation. So
right.
Maybe
but,
if you want to hold off on your camera, that would work.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
I am going to start the webinar now.
Okay. Thank you.
Here we go.
Leave.
Good morning and welcome to day 2 of the National Treatment and Therapeutic Court Conference. My name is Justice Barnes. I'm a judge in Ontario. And before we proceed any further, it is appropriate at this time to do a land acknowledgement. And for that, I'll turn to Brian Cooper.
Hi, everyone. So I'm calling in from the city of Hamilton. And so as such, I want to acknowledge that the city of Hamilton is situated upon the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. This land is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which is an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe to share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. I want to further acknowledge that this land is also covered between the Lakes Purchase of 1792 between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the credit of the First Nation. Today, the city of Hamilton is a home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, which many of us acknowledge as North America. I do also want to add on a personal note that my own family came to Canada from the UK in the 1950s. And as such, I have recognized my own place in Canada as one that has been short and one that in part is based on historical colonial practices with which I acknowledge comes with a history of injustice and generational trauma that is still felt to this day. So I personally want to acknowledge that I still have much to learn about the rich history of this land and its first people. And I want to humbly offer my ongoing commitment to better understand and act upon our shared responsibilities as residents, neighbors, partners, and caretakers, and honor the wisdom and traditions of Indigenous people across this land. Back over to you, Justice Barnes.
Thank you very much. Some 30 years ago, when we started what we believe was the first therapeutic and treatment court in Canada, marijuana was not legal. Possession of marijuana was not legal. And in fact, we had long debates as to whether or not people could complete the program if they were still using marijuana. There's been a lot of evolution over the 30-year period, and simple possession of marijuana is legal in Canada. And the question is, what impact does that have on therapeutic courts such as drug treatment courts? We're going to hear about that. And also, as a result of the drug treatment court that was started several years ago, a number of justice and treatment partnerships have developed and evolved. And so a whole lot of different types of therapeutic courts have developed in provinces across Canada. But they've typically over the years developed in a very ad hoc fashion. And they have different names, the mental health court, community wellness, courts, domestic violence courts, community courts, integrated courts, and so on and so forth. And they've typically evolved with no real structure. But a number of provinces are trying to change that. And we are going to hear from the province of Nova Scotia on what they have done to create some type of structure and some type of system, and how that is sort of working out. Domestic violence also is creates some special challenges, right? Because they are intimate partner types of violence, and there are some unique challenges that come from that. And so the question is, how exactly do these treatment and therapeutic courts function within that realm? Why do they exist? What are some of the special challenges involved? And we're going to hear some discussion about that. Now, one of the things that we've come across, particularly in the criminal justice system, is the concept of fetal alcohol syndrome. What is it exactly? What are the impacts on people who are suffer from fetal alcohol syndrome? Is it always easy to detect? Are they likely to be more prone to confessions? Are there going to be difficulties with them complying with court orders, such as to find them in circumstances where they are going to be unfairly victimized because we do not understand their challenges? We will hear about fetal alcohol syndrome and the impacts the challenges facing people who face that, and what the treatment and therapeutic core that focuses on fetal alcohol syndrome tries to achieve, and why does it exist, and what are the results. One of the very interesting things about working in this realm where justice and treatment intersect is that it can be difficult work. It can be work that could result in disappointments. It can be difficult. However, it is most rewarding. It is one of those things that is so that touches the soul in a special way. When you see human beings tackle their challenges, the struggles, and their triumphs, and to know that you are part of the process, no matter how far they go in their process, that you are part of a team that is working to uplift the human spirit, and to observe the strength and character of people who try to change their lives is very, very inspiring. And as a result, we get passionate and we develop beliefs on what is right. Well, at some point, anecdotal stories alone are not going to be sufficient. Somebody is going to ask you, how well is your program working? And they're going to say, well, prove it to me. And that is where evaluation comes in. And evaluation also helps us figure out if what we believe is working is actually working. So we are going to hear about evaluation at some point today. Now, our ability to continue to share knowledge and to share experience, practices, would not be possible without all the various practitioners and people with lived experience, academics, and all those people who give willingly of their time to enable us to do this on a regular basis. We have heard from over 200 speakers over the last couple of years. We've had over more than 100 topics, close to 200 topics that we've covered. It's all because of people's generosity. People like Brian Cooper volunteered their time to host the entire day for us, and we are very grateful to all of these people. So to all of these people, we say thank you. And Brian, I am now going to introduce you. Brian is a program manager with St. Joseph's Healthcare, Hamilton, and he holds responsibility for acute mental health inpatient care and the Cleghorn Early Intervention in Psychosis Clinic and the SCIS Inpatient Rehab Team. Brian is the co-chair of Early Psychosis Intervention Ontario Network and director at large with Canadian Consortium for Early Intervention in Psychosis. As an occupational therapist, Brian has worked in primarily mental health settings, including inpatient care, assertive community treatment, and early intervention in psychosis in Ontario, Nova Scotia, as well as Newfoundland and Labrador. Brian has led various community development projects and funded research initiatives that range from setting national standards for transition for youth in mental health care to economic evaluations of early psychosis services and cross-sectorial support in employment and mental health care for youth and young adults. Brian, we are pleased that you have generously accepted our invitation to be our host for today, and it's over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Justice Bard. I really appreciated this opportunity and working, coming from the healthcare side of our mutual work together. It's a real honor to be here, and really a great opportunity for me to learn for my own practice, as well as to share the knowledge among all of us participating today. So I'm hoping this is my first time hosting such an event via Zoom. So hopefully we don't have any too many technical hiccups, but fingers crossed yesterday's sessions went really well and we have a similar experience today. So we'll get right to the chase. Our first presentation today, we're really excited to have, as Justice Bard mentioned, a topic that I think is of interest to many of us, and the impacts of cannabis on drug treatment courts. So possession of cannabis for personal use is decriminalized in Canada, as we're all well aware. Findings from a study on cannabis use by drug treatment court program participants will be discussed here by experienced drug policy practitioners and a research team with lived experience as part of this program participation. So I will introduce Candice Vena. Candice is currently, she'll be moderating this session. Candice is currently the Director of Justice Policy at the Canadian Mental Health Association, Ontario Division, and oversees the mental health and justice portfolio. Over the last 5 years, Candice has been involved in leading work in the Human Service and Justice Coordinating Committee, a network that is established to better coordinate resources for people who have complex needs and are involved in the justice system. And I will also add Sudha Sebanas Desen will be participating in this. Sudha is the lead policy analyst for substance use at the Canadian Mental Health Association Ontario. She previously worked in the public health policy at Toronto Public Health as Policy Development Officer, where she led the City of Toronto's health policy on cannabis legalization and provided leadership and implementation of the Opioid Action Plan as staff of the Drug Treatment Strategy Secretariat. And finally, Nicoletta Curson is a research consultant with the MAP Center for Urban Health Solutions at St. Michael's Hospital, part of Unity Health in Toronto. Nicoletta graduated from the University of Toronto in 2012 with an honors in a Bachelor of Arts degree in English Literature. As a speaker and person with lived experience, she brings a unique perspective on the sources of trauma inherent in the criminal justice system and experienced by criminalized populations and advocates for therapeutic alternatives to incarceration. So I will hand it over to you, and I want to say, working in early psychosis myself, this is cannabis use and involvement in the legal system is something that's very much a hot topic. So I'm really eager to listen and learn. So over to you guys.
Thank you so much, Brian, and thank you to the organizers for having us today. And those were some great introductions, so I won't go too much further into that, but just wanted to provide some context of our respective organizations. So as you mentioned, I am the Director of Justice Policy at CMHA Ontario. CMHA Ontario is a nonprofit charitable organization, and we really are a leader in the mental health and addiction space. We work collaboratively with our various levels of partners, so at national, provincial, and local levels, and particularly work with our branches to support all of their efforts. You also mentioned the Human Services and Justice Coordinating Committee Network, which CMHA Ontario is the secretariat for. So they were a key partner in this work, particularly at the provincial level, as we have a provincial planning body who is primarily focused on supporting the provincial government strategy and identifying those provincial policy and system issues. Sudha is going to be kicking us off, and as mentioned, she is our substance use and lead at CMHA Ontario, and then Nicoletta will also be participating after that. We're so happy to have her as our research consultant and bringing her unique perspectives and lived experience of a drug treatment court. So with that, Sudha, I'm going to turn it over to you to get things started.
Thank you, Candice. Thank you so much for that introduction. Let me share some presentation slides. Right. And right, does that look good? Perfect.
Looks great.
Thank you. Thank you. So today it is my pleasure to co-present the findings from a study that we conducted on cannabis and drug treatment code programs at CMHA and partners. And it is my pleasure to co-present with Nicoletta today. So the project we will be discussing was led in partnership with it was a partnership between the Canadian Mental Health Association Ontario and the John Howard Society of Ontario, with support from Dr. Akwasi of Subimpa and the Provincial Human Services and Justice Coordinating Committee. The John Howard Society of Ontario was the lead organization for conducting the field research, along with obviously Nicoletta, who was a big part of the research. The project had an advisory committee that provided guidance and direction in the planning and implementation of the project. The committee was comprised of several leaders in the field, including Justice Barnes, representation from provincial crowns, community-based service providers, drug treatment court staff, and other leaders in the mental health and addiction sector. It was funded by the Mental Health Commission of Canada. It was part of funding for studying cannabis and mental health. And the focus of the research, in short, was the impact of cannabis use during participation in drug treatment code programs in Ontario. Okay. So just quickly about cannabis use. Even though cannabis has been legalized, there continues to be a need to build the evidence on cannabis and impacts on mental health, especially among priority populations. Due to the fact that it was not legal to study cannabis, now we are at a deficit and we need to build the evidence. So as part of this, of course, people who are justice involved were recognized as a priority group. And it is important to learn about the services provided and the needs of this population so that we can better serve them. And due to the fact that cannabis was prohibited for 95 years, we are still evolving in terms of how we perceive cannabis use and the policies. And it's been 5 years, and yet we are still catching up to the fact that it's legal. And one of the things that prior to starting the project was the CMHA Ontario conducted a quick survey of drug treatment code programs. And we did learn that the approach taken to cannabis use by participants in the program was not unified. So, this project was conducted as this was part of the reason for carrying out this project. So There was two streams to it. So one was the impact of cannabis use during participation in drug treatment code programs, as we learned from drug treatment code clients. And of course, also we spoke to service providers to learn about perceptions of cannabis use and the resulting impact of how clients are supported. So in a nutshell, it is to understand, does cannabis use impact someone's ability to complete a drug treatment code program? And there were many other aspects that we learned. Just in the interest of time, I'm just going to focus on a few of the objectives of the project. So the project was started in late 2019, the fall of 2019, and was completed end of last year. And it primarily had two parts to it. There was the learning from drug treatment code clients and service providers. And we also, as part of the project, there was a knowledge exchange forum and a policy workshop. So the research used a mixed methods approach to assess the perception of cannabis use in mental health. And the client participants included individuals who were going through the drug treatment program who may or may not have been using cannabis during the study. There was a longitudinal study through 4 surveys between May 2021 and August 22. And all participants, the drug treatment code clients, were provided compensation for participating in the survey and or any other activity as part of the project. And the service providers, there was a one survey and interviews. So it's just I'll go through some of the results, but just to give you an idea of some of the survey questions for the DTC clients, the questions was along the themes of what are your cannabis use patterns currently and over the lifespan, what led to your participation in drug treatment codes, and then a number of other questions. And with the service providers, the interview questions asked about how they can best support clients during their participation in the DTC program. And also, does cannabis use impact someone's ability to complete a DTC program? And a number of other questions to learn about their views. In November 2022, there was a knowledge exchange forum, which was a public forum, which was really well attended. I'll go through that later a little bit, with really good conversations and ideas that came forth. And then there was a policy workshop, a focused workshop that was held towards the end of the project as well. And that was by invitation to key stakeholders. All right. Did I go too far? Okay, so I just want to, before presenting some of the results, I want to talk about the project challenges. So as I mentioned, we started in late 2019, and that was right at the start of the pandemic. So that was that one challenge. But one of the challenges which would have happened at any time is the fact that some of the DTC programs are abstinence-based. And so the teacher staff, the champions we connected with, did not recruit clients to participate in the research study because it was a requirement for clients to abstain from all substances to successfully graduate, even though they took what they considered a harm reduction approach to programming. So this was obvious limitation because there was a whole subset of clients that we could not speak with. And then the COVID pandemic related challenges was also something we had to deal with. So some DTC programs were not operating were only operating services remotely or without active participants. And the staff capacity was one of the bigger issues. As you know, staff was stretched during the pandemic, serving on a number of issues, and that had an impact on recruitment, and also a big impact on kind of the diversity we were looking for. We're looking for more women, Indigenous, people from Indigenous communities, Black communities, and we could not focus on that due to these challenges. So there was also, again, access to technology and literacy, people who are home, unhoused, and have no access to services were obviously not part of the study. And as a consequence of all of this, and also the fact was that we did not get regional representation. In fact, all of our clients were from the Toronto Drug Treatment Code, from the Toronto Drug Treatment Code. So the findings are smaller than we intended. The sample size was smaller, and the findings are more descriptive, and will not be able to generalize it. However, it provides really, really good insight into the experience of drug treatment code clients and also service providers. So I'm going to go through a series of results before just a few. It was a huge report with tons of information. Just going to go through a few of them. Just demographically, the study participants were predominantly male, 93%, and 2/3 identified as white. The average age of participants was 44, and most fell between the ages of 36 to 55. And 80% of participants reported that their first interaction with police was when they were 25 years or younger. Many of them were much younger. And then one of the things I wanted to highlight was how did they end up in a drug treatment code program? The most common referrals to the DTC program include through a court worker, self-referral, duty counsel, and the client's lawyer. Most respondents joined the program as a result of being charged with an offense and substance use related to their current charges, and specified being in the program for about 1 to 2 years or more than 4 years. All respondents share that they felt supported by the drug treatment code and their treatment team and provided positive feedback. A few respondents shared that the drug treatment code program had saved their lives, while others detailed their satisfaction with the level of support and care that they received. So in terms of reasons for consuming cannabis, the most participants indicated that cannabis use did not impact their life. Those who reported an impact noted that it was positive on their overall well-being. However, it had a negative impact on their education and employment. And as you can see from this graph, anxiety and support helps sleep, and also just the enjoyment of consuming cannabis were some of the most frequently mentioned reasons. And this was also relaxation, stress relief, and a number of other reasons. I also wanted to just state that prior to their current conviction, for the reasons that they were in the drug treatment code program, about 46%, clients also used other substances. And among those who said they'd used other substances, 46% reported using crack, a similar amount cannabis, and also fentanyl. But these were the most common substances that clients used prior to their current conviction, which resulted in the participation in the DTC program. Trauma, grief, depression, and other mental health issues were the motivating factors provided to explain their substance use. And this slide shows some of the responses they provided as to what the types of benefits that they had by joining drug treatment programs. And as you can see, the participants felt really supported by the DTC staff and their treatment team. The benefits included social support and treatment services and a dedicated support team, incentives, and having an individualized treatment plan. So these were unique that they felt that the drug treatment code provided for them. But of course, there were also challenges. And the challenges reported most frequently were abstaining from using substances and attending treatment programs. So the transportation challenges, and I know also for clients who are outside of the Toronto regional area, it's even more significant in terms of transportation to drug treatment code programs and requirements, and attending court regularly. So there were obviously some challenges, and these are important for us to note. And these were amplified for many by the COVID-19 pandemic. And as you know, with the lockdowns and other a reduction in services. So we did ask, have you consumed cannabis? And this was a really interesting result. As you can see, so the survey lasted for about 2 years. As you can see, like before just as the beginning of the project, 96% said they had consumed cannabis. This graph doesn't show how often, but it just says in the past 3 months. And it keeps declining at the end of the study. So over time, the frequency and amount of cannabis consumption self-reported by clients decreased from 96% to 68%. And by the end of the study, participants indicated they either did not use cannabis or consumed very small amounts. Just to be mindful, these are all self-reported. And so we just need to be aware that there might be reporting bias. And just with this, I would also like to take a moment to touch on the overall findings on mental health and sentiments expressed by DTC clients at the end of the study period. So in terms of mental health, the overall impact of cannabis use on mental health was mixed. While cannabis use as reported by clients did not worsen and may have improved mental health, anxiety and panic reactions were also reported. So the impact of cannabis on their mental health had mixed reactions there. DTC clients were more likely over time to rank both their overall health and their physical health as good or very good. So this was really an improvement we saw over time. And over the study period, clients indicated that they made positive life changes related to employment, education, social relationships, and reduction in criminal justice involvement. Now, Nicoletta will expand on all of this in her presentation or in her talk. And at this point, I am going to pass it over to Nicoletta.
Hello, thank you, Sudha.
Nicoletta, please let me know if you want to keep this slide up, or I can stop sharing and put it back
You
on.
can leave it up. I will just talk over it. So I'm going to start with a quote from Schopenhauer. He wrote, "Every man takes the limits of his own field of vision for the limits of the world." Our collective perception of cannabis has recently shifted from propaganda, prohibition, criminalization, and now to legalization, and even the study of possible benefits. Indeed, our perception of substance use in general is in flux, from blaming dealers and users to a more encompassing and compassionate view of root causes such as poverty and trauma. There is an increasing body of literature that links cannabis use to a decrease in consumption of other substances. Acting as a harm reduction tool, access to regulated cannabis can result in a reduction in the use of other substances, including opioids, alcohol, tobacco, among others. This is still an emerging area of research and one that may contribute to supporting practices that aim to minimize health and social harms related to substance use. So, Sudha already told you a lot about the study. Just to repeat, some of the themes we explored include cannabis and harm reduction, cannabis in relation to trauma, in relation to mental health, psychosis, and cannabis and graduation versus successful completion of a DTC program. So we know in specialized courts, there is a lot of talk about being trauma informed, and that there is a focus on trauma in these problem-solving courts. So in relation to mental health, we know that harm reduction increases quality of life for participants. And as Sudha mentioned, there is still a lot we don't know about cannabis. Research into the plant itself has isolated THC and CBD as two of the more than 400 chemical compounds found in cannabis. We do know that cannabinoid receptors are vital for post-stress response recovery, and that cannabis use could assist people living with trauma and complex PTSD, which is prevalent among substance users and the incarcerated population, including DTCs. So how can DTCs support cannabis users? Currently, many DTCs don't actually test for cannabis use, and there seems to me to be a sort of don't ask, don't tell policy in effect. But in order to serve participants as best as possible and ascertain whether, and importantly, for whom cannabis is an effective harm reduction tool, we need additional research. And DTCs are prime candidates for data collection in the context of substance use and harm reduction. Sudha also mentioned some of the issues we had with the study. It happened during COVID, and Toronto was our sample study when it came to participants. There was social service providers that did participate in other DTCs around Ontario, but as for participants, they all came from Toronto. There is also a vast range of how DTCs approach harm reduction. Some are harm reduction based, some are abstinence based, and some combine the two. So this was also another sort of complication when it came to not being able to divulge certain information. If you are an abstinence-based court, you are functioning within that structure, and so having participants reveal potential substance use could be problematic, and so that research wasn't actually part of the study. And but I do think this would be really interesting to explore further. What best serves the population? I think we've come around to thinking of harm reduction as a better initial method that may eventually lead to abstinence. So some of the things that I think DTCs could employ in order to provide better programming for their program participants is one, flexibility. So including incentives and sanctions in addition to harm reduction practices to better achieve not only program goals, but individual results. And I know there are various points that specialized courts, drug treatment courts, I think there are 13 points that they offer, that is their goal for their participants. And of course, some of these are recidivism and lowering rates of reoffending and so on. But one of them is quality of life. And I wonder if maybe this needs to be the most important goal of treatment courts. Of course, how we define quality of life, I think we've come to some sort of societal consensus on what this means, or some of the elements of quality of life. And taking self-reporting and anecdotal responses from participants in DTCs, perhaps that they should lead our perception of what is a better quality of life to them, and then create individually relevant treatment options that are more effective at responding to the needs of participants. So I remember I might have mentioned that I am a graduate of the Toronto Drug Treatment Program. And so I remember one of the things that really helped me, and this was actually a sanction, and many of the sanctions I would, feel like, why am I being punished for something that is at that time beyond my control, because my ability to effectively problem solve, to effectively manage my life, and to consider consequential action of my behavior was impaired. I was in active addiction, and I still had not processed trauma that I had experienced both prior to my involvement with the justice system and during my involvement in the justice system. So, but one of the effective methods was I was given a writing assignment. And of course, I'm not suggesting that this would work for everyone, but for me, the writing assignment, even though it took me a long time to complete, every time I came up with a new excuse why I didn't have it with me, but once I finally did, it gave me the opportunity to have insight into my own situation of what I want out of the program, and not just in a way of where I'm saying something that they want to hear from me, or that I think they want to hear from me, but in a real way, something that I could reflect on my own, and then if I wanted to later discuss with the team. So that was a sanction that was very beneficial to me personally. So also, I find there are some unrealistic expectations of participants when they're in active addiction. So again, I'm just stressing the importance of individually relevant treatment. Again, cannabis in the context of women with children is another issue. There is a fear of stigma, fear of CAS involvement. Now, the effects of cannabis criminalization on racialized populations and other substances as well, not just cannabis, and how can we mitigate this in specialized courts? I think one of the important things for me that stood out in the study was the difference between the age of first contact with police versus the average age of program participants. It's on average a 20-year gap. So how can we as a justice system, as specialized courts, preempt and into getting participants at an earlier time, so that this isn't a lifetime experience for them. Also collaborating with judges, lawyers, probation officers, the Bar Association, law schools, jails, prisons, frontline organizations that work with these populations. And then one major thing we heard about was funding. So that is also something to think about. Cannabis has become a massive industry with lots of money funding in, and I was just wondering, how can some of the funding from this be harnessed to benefit individuals who had been most affected by criminalization of cannabis prior to legalization? So we talk a lot about trauma-informed programming in specialized courts. Yet we often fail to see our systems, including the legal system and other authorities, how they process and shape public behavior. The court system has at large not caught up with social reforms that have and are still taking place outside of the criminal justice system. We seem to miss the unintentional irony between systemic claims of rehabilitation while actually enforcing trauma through punishment in an already vulnerable population. And this we have called justice. DTCs aim to provide compassionate treatment and separate themselves from the Kafkaesque elements of the criminal system. And so a philosophical shift is necessary in our perception of justice, not only in specialized courts, but our societies at large. So I'll leave you now with a quote from Nietzsche, who wrote, "All things are subject to interpretation. Whichever interpretation prevails at a given time is a function of power and not truth." We should more often examine whether our systems are being built on evidence to the benefit of all its citizens, or whether they are simply a function and extension of power for those who wield it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, both of you. That was a fantastic.
Brian,
Yeah.
sorry, I just have a couple of more items to share, if I may.
Yeah, we've got 5 minutes. So
Okay,
yeah.
okay. I just want to make sure. Okay, why is this not advancing? Okay, here we go. So just quickly, I wanted to share that we heard from service providers, and in general, they were supportive of, or I should say, understanding of cannabis use in DTC programs, but were also concerned about the long-term impact. And identified supportive housing, programming, and dealing with complex clients as priority issues. The other thing, sorry, having trouble advancing this. Oh, okay. I mentioned about the policy workshop and the knowledge exchange forum, and we had diverse views from questioning the need for drug treatment programs within the context of criminalizing substance use, and also how to improve the whole range. And so there were a number of themes that were identified, mostly looking at how to improve drug treatment codes and taking a more harm reduction approach, providing more individualized analysis, and also ensuring that marginalized people, people in the Indigenous, Black, and racialized community are also well represented in drug treatment code programs and removing barriers. So in the interest of time, I'm just going to just share that there were a number of people in the project team, share the names, and thank you very much. Candice, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Sudha and Nicoletta, for that wonderful presentation. And Nicoletta, I really appreciate every time I hear you speaking and sharing your experience. It really is amazing and leaves us lots to think about. I know we only have 2 minutes here, Brian, before we have to move on, but I'm here to moderate any questions that folks have. One actually did come through during the presentation, just asking if they would be able to get a copy of our report. So the report that we completed for the Mental Health Commission of Canada was very long and technical in nature. However, we as a team are working to kind of adapt a longer report into something that would be more public facing and helpful and easily digestible in terms of our next steps and some of the policy recommendations. So we're happy to keep folks in the loop. We will be doing that through the HSJCC network and mailing list, as well as our CMHA Ontario channels. So please stay tuned for that. But any other questions, please feel free to throw them in the Q&A now.
Maybe I could just pose one super quickly. Nicolette, I really appreciated the comment you made around that gap of 20 years that we're seeing people being, and I wonder just if anyone was willing to comment on, in our line of work, what we really aim to strive for is reducing a DUP, so that the duration of untreated psychosis, so people get access as soon as possible. And I wonder if you guys had any thoughts about ways that we can better support reducing that gap.
Briefly, from more personal experience as opposed to research. So my first contact with police, I believe, was at 16, which is actually when I started, I guess, having mental health problems, though they were either undiagnosed or misdiagnosed. And it's only, really 20 years later that actually there was a diagnosis that actually made me feel like, oh, okay, this explains a lot. But so in between that time, I guess mental illness led me to experience a lot of things that I might not have otherwise. So relationships that were abusive, a variety of trauma. And in that time, a lot of contact with the justice system, not just as someone who had committed a crime, but also because of, or mostly at first, because of my experience with intimate partner violence. And while I was with him for the 4 years, there was a lot of useless police interaction where I was not advised of any resources. I had no idea that resources for IPV existed at all until the relationship was done. And so, yeah, just I think therapists, psychiatrists, youth, I think is probably the best time to catch that, because a lot of the people in the study mentioned they were 17 at first contacts. They were teenagers, they were young offenders. So at that point, I think is the most important part, where we need to create a circle of support for the individuals who may or may not have mental health problems, who may have traumatic backgrounds and a variety of issues. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'll just add to that as well, Nicoletta. I couldn't agree more. I feel like there are so many folks at different contact points of the justice system that we are somewhat missing, and that's dependent on whether they have a diagnosis or not, but it's about that collaboration and really bridging the gap between the human services and justice sectors. We know by virtue of police's role that they're the first often point of contact for folks who may have mental health, substance use, or other kind of complex needs. So how can we support them in getting folks connected to the supports they need, and really considering the broader social determinants of health? So having access to housing, employment, all those things that need to be taken care of first, so that someone can be stabilized and receive the supports they need, and hopefully get them away from the criminal justice system and more to a health focused and holistic approach.
Do I have time to very briefly add something? I also think that education is a massive piece, and like how we socialize children in our society, I think matters so much. So teaching skills of emotional regulation and all those other aspects that, you know, we learn in drug treatment court when we're already much older and have had a lot of traumatic experiences. I think even when somebody might, as a teenager, develop mental health problems, having that background that becomes part of like our society is going to be a very vital factor in shifting our perception of justice and criminalization. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Candace, Sudha, and Nicoletta. Nicoletta, especially as someone with lived experience, I think your perspective is really, really well. We really appreciate the courage in coming out and speaking, and I think your voice is one of many that I think we're happy to integrate that knowledge. So thank you so much. And again, information around the study and contact information, I believe, is in your bulletin. So I'm assuming people can reach out if they have any questions. And just want to draw attention, Robin left a really nice comment in the Q&A section. So, I'm going to move us along. Thank you again for joining us. So our next presenter is Chief Justice Pamela Williams, Nova Scotia. She's calling to us from Nova Scotia as a coordinated system of justice and treatment courts, and she's here to discuss the rationale, operation, and impacts of this system. So Chief Justice Williams was appointed as a judge to the provincial family court system in September of 2003. She's presided over youth and adult criminal proceedings and occasional family court matters. Between 2006 and 2010, she was the primary youth court judge in the Metro Youth Justice Court. Since then, has been a dedicated judge in the Dartmouth Wellness Courts and presides over adult criminal court. Further details about her bio is in your bulletin, but without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Justice Williams.
Thank you, and I'm going to try and share my screen. Okay, so thank you for the invitation to participate. And I too wanted to extend my appreciation to Nicoletta in particular. I'm always learning something from First Voice, and she makes a really great point about quality of life perhaps being one of the primary pillars of wellness courts. And certainly the human centered focus is crucial. So I'm starting off with the slogan, which says, just because you have a past does not mean you have no future. That was a slogan that was created haphazard by one of our participants, who was a young Indigenous man at the time. And when he said it to me, he said, you know, he and I were just having a chat, and he said, Judge Williams, just because you have a past doesn't mean you have no future. And I said, wow, Jimmy, that's really profound. So I asked him to repeat it. We wrote it down, and we got somebody else to actually prepare the slogan. It now sits behind the bench in the wellness court. And I've been told many times that it's had quite the impact on people who are coming into the courtroom, especially for the first time, and they feel somewhat more comfortable in that setting. So the key objectives of my presentation are twofold. One is to review the creation and evolution of therapeutic courts in Nova Scotia, and then to highlight the work of our Wellness Court Steering Committee, why it was created, when it was created, how it works, and how it strengthens partnerships and sustains programs, and end off with some of the strategic planning that we're doing. So why create a therapeutic court? Some may ask. Others may say, duh, makes perfect sense. I'm going to look at as well at the Nova Scotia Mental Health Court evolution and what I call the organic creation of some wellness or therapeutic courts across the province. And when I use the term organic, what I mean is grassroots, from the bottom up, without government funding or planning. So we know that wellness courts reduce reoffending, that they have a recovery-oriented focus, or as Nicoletta said, the quality of life focus. They address root causes of offending early on and bring in a wide range of supports of services from an interdisciplinary team. Restorative approaches are used, which I think can lead to better mechanisms for ensuring safety of the public. And they provide an opportunity for victims to be heard in any number of ways, whether it's direct involvement, being provided with updates, attending court appearances, or providing input into support plans. So the next 3 slides are thanks to the legal aid lawyer in our court who prepared them for another presentation, but I thought it was a really succinct presentation of the evolution of our court. So the first court, which was called the Nova Scotia Mental Health Court, which was created by largely, but not exclusively, government funding, opened in November of 2009. And we started with 2 clinicians, a nurse and a a nurse and a social worker. We also had a probation officer, defense and Crown. We had an administrative support and a judge who were the part of the core team. And our focus really was on, at the time, Access 1, diagnoses. And it was offender-based, meaning that there were very few offenses excluded and that guilty pleas were not required to participate in the program. But as we all know, things never stay static, and a good wellness court is nimble enough and flexible enough to do some soul searching and introspection on an ongoing basis to determine how we can get rid of that. How we can improve. And so in 2014, I'm sure there were many changes between 2009, 2014, but early on, for example, borderline personality disorder was not something that we could deal with. It was often there was no programming that was available. So in 2014, we expanded to include borderline personality disorders as a standalone diagnosis that was eligible for the court. And around the same time, we started planning for a drug court because there was a tiny bit of federal funding provided for another location in Nova Scotia, not like the 5 or 6 fully funded drug treatment courts across the country, but it did get some limited funding. And we looked at that and we said, you know what, we've got the nucleus of a group where we could expand and create our own drug treatment court. And so at that time, where drugs were the driver and custody was a likely outcome, we were requiring guilty pleas on those matters. So we created what we call the Court Monitoring Drug Treatment Program in 2015, but it was only for opioids because we needed to partner with Nova Scotia Health and Addictions, and they had an opioid treatment program that we were able to partner with. And so we limited ourselves, but we were able to deal with those types of issues. And we, as well at that time, looked at ways in which we could get early intervention and early involvement from victims. We know that in the criminal justice system, there's a thing called a victim impact statement, but it's only available once a guilty plea is provided. However, in our court, where guilty pleas were not required, we needed to come up with another mechanism. And so we called it a victim voice statement, which is very much similar to a victim impact statement, but created opportunity for victims' involvement. Then in 2016, we addressed a dilemma head on, and that was in looking at our statistics, we weren't seeing many marginalized, racialized participants. And we very quickly realized the reason was that many of them did not have diagnoses, so they didn't have eligibility criteria established. And the reason was they didn't have the trust in the mental health systems to have gone and sought treatment and received a diagnosis. And so we created this program to address and involve some Indigenous and African Nova Scotia applicants who were dealing with significant trauma issues. So in 2017, we're still on a roll, and we addressed the elephant in the room, which is alcohol. So back in 2009, there was a deliberate decision not to include alcohol as a mental health issue for admission into the court, largely because it was a floodgates issue. Alcohol was a huge problem, and we just didn't have capacity. But in the fall of 2017, we introduced an alcohol project to target alcohol use disorder, again, partnering with community residential facilities to work alongside in the community with folks. 2018, we were gearing up for our 10-year anniversary, and we were considering a lot of our lessons learned. And one of the things that we decided was perhaps it was time for a name change. So the court originally, as you'll recall, was the Nova Scotia Mental Health Court. And it didn't take long for folks across the province to say, why do you call it a Nova Scotia Mental Health Court when it only services Metro, Halifax, Dartmouth? So at this point in time, we thought 10 years later, it might be appropriate to rebrand our court. And so we decided to call it the Wellness Court. We included criteria to involve trauma, so we no longer needed the judicial monitoring program. We moved away from court-monitored drug treatment to the opioid treatment court program branding. And we added a third clinician to our ranks, which was an occupational therapist. It also marked a change in that we were no longer accepting driving offenses, in large part because there were changes to the criminal code. There were no longer curative discharge provisions. And although the federal government provided opportunity for programs to be created within provinces to address the issues, none had been created in Nova Scotia. And we felt that we would be inundated with these types of matters. And so unfortunately, we had to make that change. 2020 saw a change for everyone with the arrival of COVID. And we shut down for a very short period of time, but it didn't take us long to gear up and go virtually. I must say it was difficult. Not seeing people in person made it more difficult to understand where they were in their journey, understand whether they were having increased symptoms of illness or increased use of substances. And as difficult as COVID was for us, it was exponentially more difficult for the participants in our program. A lot of stress, a lot of worry, a lot of isolation, which led to deterioration of mental health. And so we saw this throughout 2021. They were falling away from services. We were seeing unprecedented numbers of drug-related deaths, and we were trying to figure out how we could respond. So what we did is we simplified in some ways our court. We've got the umbrella, which is the Dartmouth Wellness Court, with only two programs underneath that umbrella, and those are the mental health program and the substance use disorder program. So all substances now are eligible for inclusion into our program. And our focus really has shifted to whether or not someone's ready to engage. And also one of the primary requirements is always being able to satisfy ourselves that the risk that the person poses is something that our team can manage. So our program is more and more becoming an in-person program again. Our morning meetings, team meetings, are by video and will likely continue in that fashion, but our afternoons are opening up to mostly in-person appearances. And as of last Thursday, I believe it was, most people appeared in person. And I must say it was so refreshing to see people again. It's even when you see them on the screen, it's not the same as you seeing them in person. And so always being busy, we're gearing up for our conference, which is due to occur next Friday. And towards the end, I'll provide you with some information on that. So just to give you an idea of what we've got in Nova Scotia, 2009 was the Nova Scotia Mental Health Court program. 2011, Port Hawkesbury established a wellness court. 2012, we had the Sydney Domestic Violence Court. 2014, the Kentville Drug Treatment and Mental Health Court programs. 2016, Amherst Wellness Court that then added to domestic violence in 2022. Halifax Domestic Violence Court in 2018, as well as the Wagmatuck Healing to Wellness Court in 2018, which I'll come back to in a minute. Bridgewater started a domestic violence court, drug treatment court in 2019, and now have spread into the area of mental health. Truro is a wellness court, and Shubenacadie Wellness Court planning is underway. And so you'll see from the slide, there's many of these programs are organic in nature without any funding. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Nova Scotia, there's a map and it outlines the various programs that we have. So the Wagmatuck Healing to Wellness Court is actually on a reserve in Wagmatuck. And this was largely an initiative of the judge in Port Hawkesbury who was dealing with the wellness court in collaboration with the community of Wagmatuck. And I came along to lend support, I guess, for the creation of a court. And you'll see that it's quite different than other wellness courts in that it's got the Aboriginal art, it's got a circle bench with everyone on the same level. So it's a wonderful, wonderful spot. So now I'll move into the piece on Wellness Court Steering Committee. So as you saw, there are various courts that are popping up all over the place. They have different criteria. There are different types of courts, criteria that someone may be eligible for in one area may not be have eligibility in another. And so we thought, and also there was quite a disparity as to the degree to which mental health and addictions was working in partnership alongside wellness courts. And so in 2015, we established a wellness court steering group, working group, which then later on turned into a steering committee. And the purpose in the beginning was to build a better relationship and partnerships with mental health and addictions. But we also wanted to include other government departments such as community services, municipal affairs, which deals with housing in Nova Scotia, African Nova Scotian affairs, community members, and First Voice. And so we wanted to gain an understanding as to what the expectations were and trying to manage expectations in the creation of wellness courts across the province, and also to establish some best practices. And so 5 of the best practices that we created, and you'll receive a copy of these slides And when you click on the blue, you'll be able to actually bring up the document. So the first one, I can't attribute to Nova Scotia. It was a roadmap created by Judge Karen Ruddy, who is a judge in a wellness court in the Yukon. But it's a really nice roadmap of, if you're thinking about establishing a therapeutic court, these are some of the questions that you need to ask yourselves. Our court steering committee, however, did develop terms of reference for the group, a best practice framework for establishing and managing wellness courts in the province, as well as a cultural awareness guide to provide some guidance as to the kinds of issues that are that we need to be aware of when dealing with marginalized, racialized communities. And finally, we developed an evaluation framework to assist wellness courts in being able to evaluate the progress that they're making. So the steering committee was really looking at developing expertise in the area of strategic leadership to assist established wellness courts, but also to provide support to areas that might want to create a wellness court but needed some help in doing so. And we had a strategic planning session in February of 2020. There were, I don't know, 25, 30 people present from all the different organizations, agency, and community that I spoke of earlier. And we came up with 4 strategic pillars that we wanted to focus on. The first was communication and collaboration. The communication and collaboration with each other, with partners, with potential partners in community and government. And the second was building strategic relationships that would allow us to work on the leadership planning that we wanted to do that lead to sustainability of wellness courts around the province and expansion of wellness courts in areas where there presently are no wellness courts. So we were interrupted, as everyone was, by the pandemic, but if there was a silver lining, it was this: we can work differently in more holistic and integrated ways if we're forced to do so. But we shouldn't always be forced to do so. We should be able to work differently in more holistic and integrated ways, even when we're not faced with a major catastrophe. So we are of the view that public safety requires a strong social services safety nets that don't come from justice alone. Justice does not involve only a Department of Justice, but other social service agencies. That it needs to be, there needs to be collaborative release planning for people in custody, services critical to the successful releases were available quickly during the pandemic. So I'm speaking really here of the silver lining and what we were able to do during the pandemic. We were able to use a triage approach to reduce the number of folks in custody, albeit that was short-lived. We were able to identify the need for culturally safe services and the access to crisis intervention for mental health and addictions 24/7. So although those were things that were needed during the pandemic, I would argue those are all things that are needed if we're going to be able to provide successful wellness court environments for folks. So how do our wellness courts promote safe and healthy communities? I think in large part what we do is we reimagine what public safety looks like and recognize where the public interest really lies. And that there needs to be a more restorative, human-centered approach to problem solving, similar to what Nicoletta was talking about in her final remarks. We have to meet people where they are, so it's relationally focused, And we've got to pay attention to the connections or interconnections between the people and the issues and the context that they bring to their story, that we assist them in a comprehensive and holistic way, that there is the need for inclusion and participation, not only of participants, but of victims and community at large. And we need to be responsive to the needs of those we're working with and really be forward focused. Using a harm reduction approach based on the social determinants of health is largely the way that we go. And I really appreciated the talk about cannabis, because that's a discussion we often have, whether it's with an individual who is participating in the mental health program or in the substance use disorder program, because cannabis at times, for some, is not a problem and use is not prohibited. For others, it can lead to psychosis and a deterioration of mental health. And so we work on the harm reduction and potential and eventual elimination of use. And in the substance use program, we look at whether cannabis can be assist in reducing the trauma, or whether it could be a gateway to reusing harder drugs again. And we don't make those calls ourselves. We depend on the mental health and addiction specialists to help us in that way. So moving forward, I would say that wellness courts cannot be a standalone initiative, at least in Nova Scotia, and that we're working on a strategy to align with provincial priorities in Nova Scotia. And as with other provinces, our priority is health and transformation of the delivery of healthcare. And in particular, in one of the documents that's been created by government, they have a number of solutions, and solution 6 was focusing on improving, among other things, mental health and addictions care and services. And so there's they've seen a need for increased collaboration and coordination of departments and organizations. And we in the wellness court world see a significant opportunity to align the strategic work of wellness courts with solution number 6. And so just a final word on the conference coming up. It's next Friday. It's Therapeutic Justice, a Nova Scotia Lens, sort of focusing on how we deliver services in Nova Scotia, looking at rural wellness courts, social work, the important role the victims play. The agenda you'll be able to access as well. And it's a free program which is available and is being webcasted through our court's website. And if you're interested, you'll be able to tune in as well. So that is it. I will stop sharing my screen.
Well, thank you so much, Judge Williams. It was a very interesting talk, and speaking as my old stomping grounds, I lived in Nova Scotia for 4 years. It was neat to hear this initiative going on while I would have been there shortly after I left, at the very least. So I wonder, just to mention to the point, if there are any questions you'd like to pose to Judge Williams. We have a little bit of time for questions. You can put them in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. There is a comment there from Eileen McGinty, who I'm assuming is probably one of your colleagues.
She's our crown.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
And I saw her in the participant list. She's an avid social media, I don't know if I called her junkie, but she finds out lots of information for us through social media.
Oh, wonderful. I mean, I don't know if there's a Twitter handle or anything we need to promote here, but certainly if you look up Eileen, that would be an option. So I guess just with a few minutes within it, I wonder, again, it kind of speaks to the earlier conversation. One of the questions that I had was just around, You mentioned that in the original makeup of the team, it was a nurse, a social worker, and I think later, again, as an occupational therapist myself, I'm happy to hear that an OT joined the team. And there was obviously a theme throughout your presentation around that integration and collaboration with the service providers on the whole. And I just wondered if you're able to kind of speak to, the role that those clinicians play in supporting, linking them with appropriate program, mental health and addictions programs. And I wonder even if you're able to use maybe an example to kind of highlight what that pathway might be for somebody going through the service.
Sure. One of the things I didn't mention, and one of the early lessons learned, was that many people who came to the mental health court had concurrent disorders with addictions. And we were like, OMG, what do we do here? We don't have an addiction specialist on our team. And so we tried to work hard to establish a relationship with addictions. And it was around the time when mental health and addictions were converging. And people were starting to realize that you don't treat one first and then the other, that really you have to work holistically and in an integrative fashion. And so we schooled our social worker, or she schooled herself, I guess, by being linked to the opioid treatment program and doing a number of courses, and has become basically our addiction specialist. So all three clinicians work in concert. They take on, screening assessment reports for individually for each person, but often do case conferences in determining what's the best, route for this person. They are, for the most part, case managers, so they don't do a lot of the frontline work. However, having said that, they do step in the gap at times to provide the clinical work until they're able to be connected in the community. And so it's been really important to develop those strong relationships with community mental health clinics. And we didn't, our program doesn't jump the queue and our folks don't get priority, but they do have relationships with clinicians. And so if somebody's already connected, it's easy for one of our clinicians to reach out to the person. We get all our participants to sign consents, which allow the sharing of information, which is absolutely vital, so that we're able to do the best and not work across practices with others. Perhaps a good example to provide is the partnership that we established with Veterans Affairs. So we have a number of veterans in our court, and we link to the Operational Stress and Injury Clinic and their case managers. And so veterans and first responders often have access to services in the private healthcare area and are able to get connected more easily. And so our clinicians work with the case managers of Veterans Affairs to ensure that services are available. We do the same with the, connecting people with various programs where they're getting assistance for their drug addictions, whether it's clinics and getting, methadone or Suboxone, those sorts of things. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, but they act mostly as a case manager, do provide clinical services as needed, and then are the conduits for the sharing of information back and forth so that we can make appropriate treatment goals and monitor and support people.
Mm-hmm. And I think that that's a really important point, because again, the principle of this conference, and certainly of the work that we're all doing, is making those linkages. And I think, you're alluding to kind of, those clinicians knowing people and, oh, this is the right service for that one. And that ability for anyone within these services to be able to pick up a phone and say, hey, I might have somebody for you here. And again, thinking about that other presentation to see how we can kind of reduce those, or we'll say better pave the pathways, hopefully out of the justice system and getting that treatment, so that
and that doesn't happen by itself.
No.
I think one of the principles of wellness courts is establishing developed relationships We need to develop relationships, good working relationships with our team. We
Mhm.
need to develop good working relationships with the participants in our program, which takes time. You know, a lot of them coming from a lot of traumatic baggage and not being trusting of the system. But we also need to create those strong linkages and partnerships and relationships with community. And so we've gone on the road as a team and visited mental health clinics because, you know, personnel changes from time to time. And you sort of go on that roadshow saying, hey, this is who we are. This is what we do. You know, we're interested in working with you. Can you help us? So it's a very deliberate and intense kind of strategy to really build those relationships. Yeah.
Wonderful. And if I can put a plug for the Nova Scotia Early Psychosis Program, that
Yes.
was where I worked in the area. Wonderful, especially for those young folks with an emerging illness. So if there's no any last comments, I don't see any other questions coming up. Judge Williams, if any last closing comments you'd like to make?
I think, and I'm doing this perhaps for Aileen's benefit, we really value the input of victims. And I alluded to that in my comments. Victims are often family members, caregivers, or neighbors. And so there is reason to try and support victims, even to mend relationships, which is part of the restorative approach, holding people accountable, repairing harms. And victims often have some really valuable input that they can provide in terms of, addressing needs and even being, putting together a support plan for an individual. So we've found working with victims to be extremely important. Aileen speaks with all victims. It's a PR campaign on her part too, because some victims think that wellness courts are just a slap on the wrist and there's not real justice. And so it's an opportunity for the Crown to really explain what they are, how they work, and the benefit of them. So I would encourage, a focus on victims when folks are thinking about establishing or improving wellness court programs.
Well, thank you. And again, I think to that earlier point, that diversity of voices, how important that is throughout this process. So Judge Williams, thank you so much for your time, your insights. And just a plug again, that the conference, Aileen had referenced the conference that's happening this Friday. So for anyone.
Oh my gosh, it is this Friday, the 28th. Yes.
So for anyone interested in participating, it looks like it's courts.ns is the website where more information is available. So thank you so much again for your time, and we'll pass it over to Judge Tracy Lord now. So she's here to present about the why, the how, and the impacts of the Winnipeg Drug Treatment Court and the barriers and challenges and successes and best practice recommendations. The Honorable Chief Justice Tracy Lord received her Bachelor of Law degree from the University of Manitoba in 1991, and thereafter practiced as the Crown with the Manitoba Justice Prosecutions Divisions. In 2000, she was joined the Criminal Organization Unit, specializing in gang prosecutions and homicides between 2005 and 2007. Supervised the unit. In 2007, she became director of the Specialized Prosecutions and Appeals until her appointment to the Provincial Court of Manitoba in 2008. Judge Lord was appointed to the Associate Chief in 2019, is enjoying the challenges involved in the administration of the Provincial Court. So I'm happy to pass it over to Judge Lord and thank her for her time. And it's a slightly shorter presentation, but we're eager to learn more. Over to you, Justin.
Okay, can you hear me all right?
We can.
Okay, well, good morning from Manitoba. Thank you very much for asking me to participate. I was able to pop in and out of some of the presentations yesterday and have been with you this morning so far, and it's been terrific to hear from colleagues across the country about the important work they're doing in both drug treatment capacity and wellness in general. So thank you for inviting me to participate. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation to share, so I'm just going to go off some notes I've prepared to tell you about Winnipeg Drug Treatment Court. And my comments this morning will be centered exclusively on Winnipeg Drug Treatment Court, but I did just want to mention that we have also established a second drug treatment court in Manitoba that sits in Brandon, which is our next largest urban center after Winnipeg, and it serves the western region of the province. And that's been up and running for 2 or 3 years now, and is on a bit of a smaller scale than Winnipeg, but is certainly using the same principles, approach, and structure. So what I'm saying about Winnipeg is also going to apply to that court as well. So I'm going to start with just a brief background of the Winnipeg Drug Treatment Court. Then I'm going to move on to discuss our most recent evaluation report, which addresses what we know to be successes at this point, and which also makes recommendations for us in terms of some challenges we have moving forward. Our court in Winnipeg started sitting in January of 2006. It is an entirely federally funded court. There is some in-kind contributions from the provincial government. One example of that would be the space, the office space that the program operates out of is in a provincial justice building. But the actual dollars are coming from the federal government. Just briefly, our governance structure, we have an oversight committee, which is chaired by the chief judge and comprised of the judges that regularly sit in drug treatment court, along with representatives from both Crown's offices, duty council, the Defense Lawyers Association, policing agencies, and other community partners. This committee has the central decision-making power and role for the direction of the court. So for instance, the decision to expand into the Westman region and sit in Brandon would be the kind of decision that is made by the oversight committee. We also have an operations committee, which is comprised of the judges who sit in drug treatment court and the lawyers who regularly appear there, as well as the staff of the program. And that committee meets more regularly than the oversight committee and deals with the day-to-day running of the program and the day-to-day running of the court. So our court has been consistently evaluated. It was done annually between 2009 and 2015. And that evaluation is done by the Justice Research Institute, which is part of the Department of Criminal Justice at the University of Winnipeg. And it's been a consistent group doing the evaluation since the start. So that's been very helpful because they have all of the history and continuity from the start of the court. These evaluations are available on our court's website, so they're publicly accessible. So again, annual reports between 2009 and 2015. Our next evaluation after that was not completed until 2022 for a couple of reasons, and it dealt with the years 2015 to 2021. So what happened in 2015 is that some major changes happened in drug treatment court, and it affected the funding model of the court and how the court was staffed. So there was a real major shift in 2015, which I'm going to talk about in more detail because I think it's affected the positive outcomes we're seeing. So prior to 2015, our federal funding went directly to the Addictions Foundation of Manitoba, who administered the program basically in its entirety, subject to the oversight committee. Their addiction counselors essentially filled the role of both therapist and case manager. And in many situations, the case management function that they were required to fill included having to do compliance aspects of the program. So urine analysis, curfew checks, and decisions being made about rewards and sanctions to be given to the participants. So at times the role was very blurry for them, and the duality of the role in some cases damaged sort of that trust between the participant and the therapist aspect of the program. And then that necessitated a change in counselor mid-program. So that for some participants and certainly for the staff was a difficult scenario to maneuver through and definitely cause some problems. So in 2015, the government of Manitoba agreed to accept the federal funding directly into essentially the justice budget and administer the funds and run the program. So what happened at that point then is we took the opportunity to look at our staffing model, and we adjusted it to have very separate therapeutic and case management roles performed by different people. So now the therapeutic role is contracted out to the Addictions Foundation of Manitoba, which goes by a different name now, but it's essentially the same agency. And the case managers, and that function is now performed by individuals who are employed by the Justice Department. They fall under that umbrella. So very separate. The therapists strictly provide the one-on-one therapy and group therapy, while the case managers also participate in some aspects of the therapy, but their focus is on all the other necessary issues that need to be addressed, like housing, employment, education, and compliance with the program requirements, which includes the decision-making about sanctions and rewards. So those two roles, we've now separated them. And I think it's working much better for both the staff and the participants. It's been a beneficial change. So while that staffing model changed quite significantly, the structure of the program remained the same. We still have maintained a 4-phase structure. The first phase is the orientation stage, which is about a month long. And at the end of that orientation phase, the participant decides whether to either opt in or opt out of the program. Next is the stabilization phase, which is approximately 4 months long. And the focus of that, the emphasis of that phase is on program participation, establishing safe and stable housing, and establishing community supports. This is followed by what we call the intensive phase, which is again roughly a 4-month period in which the focus is on maintaining employment, or focuses on employment, training, education, and the real treatment component of the program. The final stage is the maintenance stage, which is focused also 4 months long approximately, and focuses on maintaining the new lifestyle and requires abstinence for 4 consecutive months. To graduate from the program, you have to either be employed, enrolled in training or education, have the 4 months of sobriety that I just mentioned, and no program violations for 8 months. We also, I wanted to mention just before I move outside of the program a little bit, we also have an important relationship that we've established with community corrections. We have a small group of dedicated probation officers that support the participants while they're actually in the program, and then support and supervise them post-sentencing. So there's continuity with probation throughout. So there's not that sort of hard shift from having a therapist, case manager, and then a shift to a probation officer. So now you have some context about how our program operates. And so I'll give you a bit of an idea now about our current participant demographic and how the outcomes under the new model that I've described since 2015 compare with the outcomes under the previous model. So at any given time, we have an average of about 20 participants in the program in Winnipeg. We generally have a fairly long list of applicants waiting to be screened and approved for entry into the program. Our current demographic leans towards single males, about 61%, with an average participant age of 30. 2/3 of our participants are unemployed upon entry into the program, and about half of them have actually had no previous criminal involvement until the offense that brings them into the program. Drugs of choice we're seeing currently is predominantly crystal meth, cocaine and opioids, and increasingly fentanyl, which is a challenge for sure. Most of our participants are found to have high needs and be high risk on the risk management tool used to evaluate them on entry into the program. But, you know, it's acknowledged that that's primarily due to their addiction as opposed to other things. Most are facing a lengthy period of provincial jail if they were not to go through the program, and most commonly for trafficking offenses. Most of our participants have also suffered some significant past trauma, which has not been addressed and which has ultimately led to their addiction issues. The average time spent in drug treatment court is between 12 and 18 months. So, you know, if you're at that 18-month point, it's been a long commitment and a rigorous program that you've faced, as opposed to a jail sentence. So just some stats now from our most recent evaluation. Our graduation rate is 37%, which is up from 34% in the pre-2015 evaluations. It doesn't seem like a significant increase, but when you look at the small number of people we're dealing with, it actually is quite a significant increase. Between 2015 and 2021, so for a 2-year period following graduation, none of our graduates have reoffended in any way. So we're super proud of that. Previously, there was a modest reoffending rate of about 14% of the grads. So again, that's a significant improvement in terms of recidivism. And even of those who were discharged between 2015 and 2021, only 19% reoffended, as compared to 46% pre-2015 under that old model. So can I say that the change in model has resulted in those numbers? I can't give that correlation, but we certainly think that that's contributed to a really positive program delivery model for our participants. The evaluation also attempted a cost benefit analysis for the timeframe 2015 to 21. And in terms of criminal justice costs, so that would be a comparison per diem of the cost to keep someone incarcerated versus the per diem cost of treating someone within the program and in the community. The number is over $16 million. So again, a significant actual dollar figure. Much harder to put a number, obviously, on the social welfare benefits of the program, but I think we can see those would obviously also be reduced, as well as just the direct costs of the Commission of Crime itself. So it's hard to quantify that, but I think it's clear that people who are employed and are not collecting social assistance or other assistance in terms of unemployment benefits, they're consumers, they're paying taxes. People who can take care of their own children, reduce the costs of children being in care. People who are physically and mentally and emotionally healthy require less health care, further or reduced risks in the community for ambulance attendants and hospital stays. So all very positive outcomes that we can see. I see I only have about 5 minutes, so I'm just going to quickly comment on the participant aspect of the evaluation. So they also do a survey of current participants, past grads, and even those who have been discharged. The overall rating from them of the program is quite positive. They all reported better emotional, mental, and physical health as a result of their participation in the program, even if they didn't complete it. There were 2 common themes that were negative that the participants raised. One was high staff turnover, and the other was a perception of inconsistent treatment in terms of the length of time people were in the program. And so the report made 5 recommendations, and those 2 aspects are included in them. So I'm just going to quickly give you the recommendations, and then hopefully there'll be a couple minutes for questions if there are any. Okay, the first recommendation was to increase referrals from the provincial crown, which they've undertaken to take a look at and do. Second recommendation was to establish permanent positions rather than term positions to decrease staff turnover. Third recommendation was to keep the time in the program to a 12-month limit as long as all the program requirements have been met. The fourth one was for those who are coming into the program having already done significant programming or treatment, allow them to enter at not at the beginning of the program, but to meet them where they're at. And then the fifth recommendation was a review of the criteria for sanctions and rewards within the program. So we're going to take those 5 things and focus on that moving forward, and hope to even have a more successful program going forward. So that's my quick little wrap up there. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
I see one question has come up. It just says from Lindsay, just saying, I'm curious about the difference between your role, between the role your probation officers play in comparison to the case managers. As a PPO in Ontario, who is working with our local drug treatment court, this is a role we've been trying to work out.
So the case management role would clearly be a more hands-on, intensive participation. I know the probation officer does a risk assessment when the person comes into the program using their corrections risk assessment tool. And then that is repeated at the end of the program to evaluate the reduction in risk the person poses and to prepare for their probation experience. They are a regular face around the program though, so that there's familiarity with the probation officer throughout, and then integration right into the community sentence. So there is certainly a differentiation between the roles, and the case management role is far more intensive, but it is a support that's there as well.
Great. And it looks like we might have time for those. I'm going to try to do this properly. We have a hand's been raised. So C Shafe 4, I think you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
You okay? Well, you didn't hear me, did you?
Yeah, we can kind of hear you.
Sorry, that was unintentional. I apologize.
Oh, okay, no problem. Okay, well, that brings us actually more or less right to time. Judge Lord, I'm not sure if you have any last closing comments before we wrap up for our break.
No, I just thank you again for asking me to participate, and I've certainly learned a lot from the presentations that I've heard so far, and I hope we can take away something from our experience in Manitoba.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your insights and participating in today's talk. Lots of really interesting information certainly happening in Manitoba as well as across the country. So a lot for us to absorb. And thank you again, Judge Lord, for your time today. So we are going to take a brief 15-minute nutrition break. So if you need to grab a coffee, we'll be back at 11:05. And we'll continue our day. So thank you so much for everyone's participation. Thank you to all the panelists, and we'll see you in about 15 minutes. Okay, we are back. So hopefully everyone had a great lunch, a snack. Wanted to just first off, I want to acknowledge the earlier presentations. There were great presentations this morning. There was a Zoom user that asked a question to Justice Williams that I missed. So I wanted to just acknowledge I'm going to try to get an answer for that. So I've asked if Justice Barnes is able to circle back with her to get that answer. So hopefully we can get that for you by the end of the day. I wonder, Joanne and May, are you guys present? Or you... There's Joanne.
Hi.
So we so far this morning we've kind of been all over the country, and we're going up to the Northwest now. So we're really thrilled, and I'm personally very interested to learn about today's presentation from Joanne, May, Kelly, and Daniel. So today they're going to be speaking about the why, the how, and the impacts of the Yukon Domestic Violence Court, and similar to the other ones, discuss some of the barriers, challenges, and successes, and best practice recommendations. So I think there's three of you I see in May's screen. So welcome, guys. So just as a quick background, Joanne Green, and I'll go very quickly with these. So if you need more information about their bios, that will be in your bulletin. Joanne Green is the manager of the Justice Wellness Center, the Yukon Government Department of Justice in Watson Lake and Whitehorse. Joanne has spent most of her career in the federal government Public Prosecution Service of Canada, holding the position of Crown Witness Coordinator, Crown Witness Program Coordinator. Joanne is currently employed as the manager of the Justice Wellness Center after spending the past 5 years supporting the Yukon's Therapeutic Courts, Domestic Violence Treatment Option Court, and the Community Wellness Court. May Stewart is the Director of Justice of the Laird Government. May Stewart is a Casca woman and is part of the Crow clan. Her mother was May Broghagen, and grandmother is Nina Nahas. May grew up practicing her Casca culture along the Highland River on her family's trap line, and continues this tradition with the 3 adult children. May worked in the justice system most of her life, and since 2011, she sits as the Laird First Nation Justice Director and has the privilege of assisting Casca people through their justice and welfare systems. She's a strong advocate for restorative justice, land-based healing, and holistic alternative practices. Kelly Allen is the supervising team lead and the clinical counselor at the Justice Wellness Center. Kelly has worked at the Yukon Government Department of Justice for over 18 years. Kelly has worked in various capacities over the years and is currently working as the Justice Wellness at the Justice Wellness Center as a clinical counselor. This role provides Kelly counseling treatment programming for individuals entering the therapeutic courts with needs related to intimate partner violence, the Domestic Treatment Option Court, and Community Wellness Court for those challenges related to addictions and mental health. And last but not least, Daniel Dick is a justice worker at the Laird First Nations and Deneke Justice Program. Daniel Dick is a Casca Dene man of the Crow clan. Daniel has lived in Watson Lake, Yukon for the most of his life. He has worked in the Laird First Nation government in various positions as the receptionist, education assistant, language assistants. And he likes working with the community and helping out in any way he can. Daniel has been a justice worker since 2018 and works in restorative justice and helps in developing and planning programs that enhance and teaches traditional Casca activities, values, and principles. And so without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to you guys, and thank you so much for joining us, and we're all eager to learn more.
Morning, everyone. I'm going to share screen and open a PowerPoint. Maybe I'm not.
I think if you click that, there's that little green square at the bottom there, the share screen.
Yeah.
It should give you a couple of options of windows that you have open.
When I actually open them, nothing happens is the problem. Oh no. Kelly, are you able to do it your end? No, I
Can't
sent-
hear you.
Right now. Okay, can you see it?
Not yet, no. If you, Joanne, if you're running to issues, you can, I can send you my email address and you can email it to me and I can put it up on my screen if that's.
Okay. Let's do that. Might need opening a few more screens to do it though. See how Kelly's doing there. Send a copy through mail.
We're not having any luck at this end, Joanne. I think if we send it to the Mr.
Yeah.
Cooper, that would be fantastic. And then we get to instruct him on when to hit the next slide.
Okay, go with your email.
Yeah, I just sent you my email address there, so
Oh, shoot.
in the chat function.
Got it. Copy. Hit you right now. There we go. In the meantime, I will queue it up nonetheless. So good morning, everybody. Sorry about the glitch here. So the Domestic Violence Treatment Option Court and Community Wellness Court has run in Whitehorse for pretty much the past 15 to 20 years, both programs. In Watson Lake, we did open a version of the Domestic Violence Treatment Option Court, and over the years, it's sort of bounced on and off, dependent upon different staff, Yukon government staff that have been placed in the positions of counselor and probation officers in that community. In the Whitehorse program, we have a plethora of resources within the community. It's structured very similar to typical drug treatment courts, mental health courts, or specialized courts that you hear of across the country, where a client has to enter a guilty plea, get released on bail conditions, and then from there enter the program. And so Brian's having trouble too, I think. Yeah.
I'm just wondering, it's not a file format that I'm able to open. Is it a PowerPoint slide?
It is a PowerPoint slide, yeah.
Do you mind just trying to see if you could like resave it as like a .ppt, I think?
Okay.
And send it to me.
We're eating up precious time here, so. What I'm going to do instead is try that one. So as I was saying, sort of with the staff turnover issues we knew were present in Watson Lake. It's a very small community. It's about a 6-hour drive to 5-hour drive-ish to Watson Lake from Whitehorse. We did have a probation officer there and a clinical counselor that went back and forth. And there we go.
Well, I think we got it at our end, Joanne.
Oh,
I just got it up on my screen too.
Oh,
great.
okay.
You guys
So
must
I
have
think
beat me to it. So
we're
Great.
good now, I think.
All right.
So you already did the intro.
Yeah.
and
So
how it started.
sorry, if you could just go back to the second slide real quick, Kelly.
There you go.
So what we knew was happening in Watson with the staff turnover, we really needed to sort of address it differently. So a couple of years ago, Watson approached the Justice Wellness Center, wanted to reopen the program, but we knew we had to really do it differently. We had to think about how do we build this program that's not dependent on system-based structures like court or staff turnover issues within a government? And how do we build it thinking really outside of the box and collectively in order to support a different partnership with the community? Yeah, so like I said, it was specialized in mainstream. And so we moved to doing it a bit differently. And that was a true partnership with the Liard First Nations Justice Department and government. And next slide. It had to be sort of based on the needs of the community. And when I originally pitched this notion to my boss, I said, I really want to build sustainable programming that has multiple layers of training. If we could digitize some of the training that we're doing so that it can help train new staff members as we come, and that sort of move it kind of into an adult diversion style of programming that was community grounded, and there was lots of capacity to build the program. And when I originally pitched this to my boss, he says, "You're going to put yourself out of work." And I said, well, perfect. Then if the community can, build that capacity to bridge what they know their needs are, better they do that than the colonized system of justice and courts. So from there, we, next slide. From there, we knew it had to be First Nations led through the Casca lens and community driven. Although Yukon government's employees were essential in the original development of this, we wanted that to be replaceable. If YG employees left, for example, we knew the program could sustain. Removing the colonized processes and the mindset, and really getting to the grassroots initiatives that could be maintained in that community. And we applied for funding for Kelly's position, and were successful in obtaining a 4-year funding platform for the launch of this. We also used lots of government dollars to hire First Nations consultants to do a lot of elder healing work and support and growth work before we launched the project. Next slide. And why we were doing it this way comes in, Kelly. We knew we had to do it differently.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, the whys, and that's exactly like Joanne had queued up. And I think it's so super important to, if you're going to form a partnership that is truly meaningful when it comes to restorative. Yeah, we're on. Can you see me, Joanne? We don't see us at this end.
Yeah, I see you and hear you.
Okay, perfect. So what was really important when we came into this is really having a clear understanding of some of the history, like the fundamentals and undeniable facts that lead to overrepresentation and the need for specialized therapeutic courts. So as you can see, research has been really clear, and it's still growing, about the need that a paper I discuss here, that in 2019, it talks about, and it's Canadian data as well, that although Indigenous people only make up 3% of the population, yet 27% constituted those in prison. So there's a clear indicator of overrepresentation, as well as it captures the importance of the DDTO program, because 50% of those, the research was also able to determine that those incarcerated were also impacted by relationship violence as children. So we also know that Indigenous women are at a minimum 2 or 3 times more likely to experience intimate partner violence compared to non-Indigenous women. So making sure that our DDTO program and partnership really put the Casca lens first, so that it was meaningful, to make meaningful responses to IPV was really important, and have a clear understanding of those origins of overrepresentation. So the next point is that some of the primary reasons that Indigenous people are overrepresented in jails and the criminal justice system, and as noted by the Royal Commission of Aboriginal People, which is also quoted in a federal government, and I put the link there for everyone, document that discusses overrepresentation Indigenous people in the criminal justice system is they note primarily it's colonialism is one of the first reasons, socioeconomic marginalization, and of course, culture clash. And we see that being in the justice system for 18 years and on my journey of growth and learning to decolonize myself, even as I learn and grow with experts and really get over yourself in the field as a clinician, as well as a representative of the court system, has been key to making this work. So that means that we are able to see the whole picture and the historical picture, and we acknowledge that there's been a disconnect from people's families and their communities and culture, and what this long-term negative effect has had. And we admit we've seen some progresses, but it's undeniable from our perspective and purview on the ground that we know we need to do better, and we know we can, and that's what part of this initiative is. So on the next slide, we move to kind of like the facts behind that. So we know that there's a lot of partnerships involved when you're building programming and different streams through therapeutic courts. And it's pretty clear that the partnerships are often colonial, including us historically, and that there is an undeniable lack of cultural safety within their colonial systems that people experience. So that's something you need to know and understand going into that, so that it assists in putting kind of the community's needs first and really hearing what their needs are. So like I discussed before, colonialism and culture clash are two of the primary reasons for Indigenous overrepresentation. But culture clash is described or defined as when Indigenous people are required to fit into a system that does not recognize their values, and ultimately causing overrepresentation. And that's what this DBTO program is all about, is recognizing there is culture clash, and how do we change that? How do we actually make it more about culture and taking out the clashing piece? So we've, during the partnership and our with Denaga, as well as our partners in the court process, they are keen to make changes with us as well, and learning and changing as we grow. So lucky for us, we had the opportunity to partner and support with Denaga in one of these initiatives. They have plenty on their plate. They're a very successful Justice Department. And Watson Lake for Justice Wellness is definitely one of our pilot projects. And we recognize too what partnership is, and partnership means to us in our role at JWC is supporting Denaga to be the lead in all we do together. So I literally stand back and follow that lead. So it's our opportunity in the community and as part of the criminal courts and the criminal justice system to it's our opportunity and responsibility, we feel, to respond to what First Nation communities have been calling for over decades. And that has been easily, I found it in research like long time ago, like back into early 2000s, 1998, I've read a paper where these changes, what we're doing now has been called for, but we just haven't been listening. So this is our opportunity. That's what I mean by doing it different, and supporting it completely from that First Nation lens. And the evidence that we found on the ground, as well as what's purported in other areas of success, is that this is the way, and it's obvious in this joint project and partnership with Denaga. So I'm capturing data as we go, and it's undeniable when we step back and take the clash out of the system and do it their way. I do the clinical counseling one-on-one, and as well as attend the groups. And it is it's remarkable how much of a change and shift there has been in intervening with factors underlining IPV when you link it back to belonging and culture and making that meaningful. So I think that's probably what my part for introducing May and Daniel is. And I'll move the slide for you. And I'll let May introduce a little bit about the photo they have here. Here, Daniel, I'll switch seats with you.
The Democratic Justice Program began in 1950 to 1995, around that time. And the photo that was included is some of the participants that was part of the program, and we still have the some of the initial people in the photograph involved in our program. The Denegat Justice Program is part of the Liard First Nation Watson Lake. It is a supports community-based justice, provides culturally appropriate alternatives to mainstream justice. The programs use restorative and other Indigenous processes such as healing circles, victim offender mediation, traditional workshops, cultural counseling, and Casca traditional practices and programs. Accountability is achieved by the harmer accepting responsibility for their actions, examining the impact on the people that were affected. And in the program, the elders have an important role in the restorative justice processes. They're the foundation of the Denegat Justice Program. They bring support, understanding, guidance, life experiences, and foundational traditional teachings. They help the harmer acknowledge their harmful actions and influence meaningful ways to change behaviors to restore community harmony. The elders' support is very successful in our program. We also partner and participate with the DBTO program, and the whole community is invited to programs that we hold monthly. And the mainstream court, the high numbers of assault charges related to intimate partner violence, ineffective in supporting the community needs. There's limited resources in the court, limited options for the community. The Denegat worked to make the court process relevant to the community needs and tied to community capacity building initiatives.
About making mainstream court relevant to the community. Our program ties to court process and traditional clinical services. Clinical counseling is intersected with the Casca wellness wheel and the traditional 7 sacred teachings to support Casca cultural values and knowledge. And the 7 sacred teachings are truthfulness, love, humility, trust, respect, courage, and honesty. And these teachings are discussed and covered in each of our programs that we bring to the community that will help those involved in the criminal justice system and community members. The specialized court program offers treatment and support to work on ways to build healthy relationships and build stronger connection with practical ways. And how it works, the deal is that charges are laid, appearance in court, and speaking with a lawyer about participation in the program. And if the sustainability assessment is requested and a suitable ability will be entered. And counseling and treatment based on the individual needs of the participant. Regular court appearances is to review progress. Sentencing is upon completion of the treatment program. And role of the courts. Role of the courts is to focus on how the client is doing and how to help build support for the completion and goals. Informed of the client's progress through bi-weekly reports from a treatment team. Engagement by the judge. They will ask how the client is doing. Treatment and monitoring are maintained until the program is completed. Client can maintain engagement with the treatment program after the sentencing.
So I think I'll turn it over to May just to kind of sum that up a little bit. Just the highlights of working together in the program, and what you find is working. And
yeah, in our community, we found that the mainstream court system just was not working. And the program we did have a program a few years ago, but it kind of died out. It just wasn't working in our community. So Kelly and I got together and talked about redeveloping the program so it was culturally relevant for the people that that were in the system. And we knew that we needed to add culture, and culture was the main focus. And people had to know why they were in the program, and we needed to see success, and just marrying the colonial side of the court and our traditional teachings to make it relevant in the community. And involving our elders, we knew would be the root and the foundation of the program. So we really stress culture and community involvement in elders, with elders guidance. And we see the community is buying into it, and it's more relevant and it's more meaningful for everybody in the community. So with the help of Joanne and Kelly, to open the door so that these teachings, that our Casca ways, could be introduced into the system. Otherwise, we would still be trying to figure out how are we going to make change. But with the door opening through the community wellness court and Joanne and Kelly, we were able to get our foot in the door. So I think a lot of communities have the ability to work within the system and also recognize culture. That is the foundation. Like, you have to have culture.
And I just want to add, thank you, May. And I just want to add to that, May is a fierce and passionate leader for her community, for this community. So is Daniel, incredibly grounded in culture, teaches me things all the time. We, Joanne and I speak for Joanne, of course, too, feel incredibly lucky and honored that we were trusted enough to build a relationship where it has to be trust, because they need to trust, the Denaga needed to trust that our intentions were genuine. We knew the fundamental facts, we honored that. And just from the therapeutic perspective of me working with individuals, the participants of the Casca DBTO process, repairing harm is ultimately at the core of healing for everyone in a community, the family system, the victim, the person that's doing the harm, the community, all the citizens. And that's built on healing self. And that was what I was speaking of earlier in the slides, is that I can speak to empirically, because for the last year and a half, I've been watching not only those connections back to culture and self grow, but flourish, where participants in the program are actually making decisions based on the 7 sacred teachings versus something that doesn't belong to them. And that has made significant difference. And we're still growing and learning as we go. And as is our group, we do have issues right now, and they are good issues to have. Like I said today, we have growing pains because of the growth and the people that are attending more and more. And I also wanted to add about working in partnership with Denagab. Ultimately, the goal was to build enough capacity and strength and momentum within the community to be self-led, and that is happening. And I am just lucky enough to be there as a guest. They don't need me. I can literally just be conduit now of referrals to a Casca program that lives and breathes in the community. But I'm just lucky enough that they keep inviting me back. So, but it is also, it proves that when we kind of pull back the colonial lens and put what the people have been asking for decades first, it works. And I just want to impress that on everyone in just my different work across the communities in general, but especially Watson Lake. So I want to give thanks to Denaga as well. So, but I think we're going to turn it back to Joanne to kind of wrap that up for us.
If you could stop sharing your screen, that'd be perfect. Thank you. Yeah, in wrapping that up, I just want to talk about what that looks like on the ground. And so the process, which I sort of envisioned after our first few meetings with the Liard First Nations, May and Daniel, Chief and Council, in envisioning how we would do it differently, I suspected this process, entering the guilty plea, moving into court process, being supervised by a probation officer that you saw in the slide earlier, that sort of traditional way of doing specialized court programming. I suspected what would happen is as the community engagement and growth started, we would see less referrals through charges and through that process, and more, as I coin it, sort of like an adult diversion program, that sort of CASCA-led program. So what that looked like was, at first, it was, like I say, Kelly and one of our elder consultants who does healing work going into the community. It started with 4 elders showing up for meetings, grew to 16. We identified those 7 sacred teachings through the CASCA lens and what they meant to the community and to the people. And from there, they grew programs. They grew on the land programs, traditional parenting, and trained several community members. As a matter of fact, over 30 community members are engaged in the process. And so pre or post charge, the RCMP or the Crown can refer now. And sometimes it's a community member who's calling the program and saying, my child is in trouble, and can I refer them to the program? What we're doing on the ground isn't just the learnings and the teachings and the clinical piece to really intersect with the trauma. And we're building that in a way that looks very, very differently. So if you have a group that is engaged in the learning workshop on the land program or group program, from there, they're invited to come back and participate as a lead in one aspect of the program. And as more programs start running, the harmer continues to move through their own journey by becoming honored in that process, as does the victim. And so the program that Watson Lake is building, as I said, our referrals are significantly down. I think we are only getting 4 or 5 a year, but there's over 17 people in the program in total. And that's the difference. It's the courts recognizing also that as we built the capacity in the community, they were confident that the process could function without that mainstream sort of charges and jail and bail conditions. And May once asked me, I don't know if she's still on the line because I know they had to sneak out to another meeting. She said, are we making a difference? I want to know if we're making a difference. And I mean, engaging in this work for harmers and victims is really challenging and not going to sort of see long-term results in a year and a half. But what we are seeing is 4 people moving to 16 people, moving to 30 people, and growing still. The strength in the community engagement and the trust that we've built and other agencies and processes, colonialized processes, are seeing and letting go of, and allowing Watson Lake to honor their culture and import justice in their community in the way that they see needed. That's the strength in what's happening here. And as that continues to grow, yes, we will absolutely see difference.
Well, thank you so much to this whole team. Really, really engaging and interesting and eye-opening presentation. And I really love the focus just on self-healing and just that integrate and that sustainability piece. I think it's a remarkably inspiring story and kind of journey that you guys have been on. So I really, really appreciate your insights and sharing it with us today. So just to the audience, if you have any questions, you can put them in the Q&A, or we discovered in an earlier session, you have the ability to raise your hand if you want to ask it to the panel. One of the things, just while we're waiting, I wonder if you might be able to provide a little bit more information of the role of the elders, and kind of the tasks that what they're tasked with, and again coming from a healthcare perspective, you know, that comment around kind of building capacity, strength within the community, but also giving individuals that opportunity for self-healing. And I wonder how the role of the elders kind of plays in facilitating that, if you're able to provide a bit more detail.
Yeah, once we got sort of support from a mainstream process, so the sort of the legal structure and subcommittee to start developing this program, the next thing we did was invite several elders to a meeting. And that was the first 4 group of elders that has now grown to 16. What was learned was elders are often called upon in the community to do a multitude of things. But one of the things they're called upon to do is take care of children, where we have areas of mental health or substance and addictions happening in some of their children or nieces and nephews, et cetera. And what was learned through that, we thought we could do a couple of meetings and then sort of start supporting the elders in intersective programming. What we learned was we had to do a lot more healing. So we actually spent 4 months with Kelly, the clinician, and the First Nations consultant, just doing healing workshops. And the elders now feel like they have role and purpose in a positive way. And so that was the first journey for their engagement. After that, they are present in learnings and teachings. So as we're doing group work and a harmer may talk about their feelings, the elder's role would be to reflect that in positive light, to intersect the CASCA values within that person, to help them guide them back to their cultural roots, learn the cultural pieces. And then the clinician is there to address the mental health, suicidal ideation, and trauma responses. Every program we do, except for the one-on-one counseling, is now done with the clinician and the elder and the First Nation consultant healer in the room, on the land programming, group programming, everything. But after that, after the 16 elders grew, their role was to help guide their community back to their cultural roots, one person, one harmer, one victim at a time. Yeah. They also lead some of the sacred fire circle ceremony on the land and things like that. Yeah.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. Are there, just putting a call for any last questions, comments from the audience? Okay. On that note, May, Kelly, Daniel, and Joanne, just thank you so much for your time and your insight and sharing what's a bit of really insightful and inspiring journey you've been on. So we really thank you for your time, and yeah, wish you well as the journey continues. So thank you so much, guys. I'm going to pass. Well, it looks like she's sharing your name today, so.
Yes. 2 Justins today. So this is Maggie. Maggie, thanks for hopping on. We did run into some difficulties, but yeah, we're really excited to be here and to share more about the Homefront model. We're going to also share today about the Homefront pillars, which is internationally recognized nationally and internationally. So I'm just going to share my screen here to get things started. Great. And Maggie, when you're ready. And you just unmute there.
Okay. There we go. Sorry about that. I was trying to turn up my volume. Let me do that. So thank you again for taking the time to let us present and give you a little bit of a snapshot of the Homefront model here in Calgary. Homefront's mission is creating a safe community by eliminating domestic violence through direct justice coordination, client service, and facilitated community action. Homefront's vision is a society free of domestic violence, where everyone has the potential to reach their fullest opportunity. Homefront is unique in Calgary. We'll be discussing our coordinated and collaborative justice response model. We'll review the 3 pillars of Homefront, share our lessons learned, and we'll be moving on to a Q&A. But first, we're going to jump into a short video that shares with us the humble beginnings of Homefront. Right, Justin?
Domestic violence. It's a huge problem that doesn't ever seem to go away. It's behind closed doors, and ultimately, there doesn't seem to be any justice. In Calgary, Homefront is a collaboration with the criminal justice system and the community. For families impacted by domestic violence, this collaboration means they receive treatment and assistance quickly. The results for families are life-changing.
It got loud and he did hit me, he kicked me actually, and the neighbors, I think, heard it and called the police.
First and foremost, policing has to recognize the dynamics of domestic violence, that it can't be treated as we treat other crimes, that domestic violence truly has to be dealt with by specialists, hence the creation of our domestic conflict unit.
A Homefront caseworker is assigned to give the victim a voice throughout the court process. A court team meeting just prior to the case being heard by the judge is one of the keys to making a difference. Gathered in the room are a probation officer, defense counsel, police officer, prosecutor, and the Homefront caseworker. The new practice has increased complaint participation in the court process from 6% to over 80%.
On that first date, we do have dramatically more information available to a prosecutor than what was available that early in the past. And so decisions can be made earlier in the game. In the past system where there was a simple prosecution and the likelihood of jail, there was several hindrances to resolution of a case. Obviously, the big one was the threat of jail. Well, he's a trucker with Rex Trucking, and if he gets a conviction for assault causing bodily harm, there's a significant risk he won't be able to go across the border.
Your Honor, on September the 27th,
before this project, there was a high percentage of victims of domestic violence who, by the time the matter came on for trial, simply did not want to testify. We have taken nothing away from the criminal justice system with all of its safeguards for both someone who is innocent until proven guilty and the person who is the main witness on behalf of the Crown. We as a court have simply facilitated this additional option to be added to the criminal justice system in a way where the actual outcome to people's lives can be more positive than when we only look at the legal side of those lives.
It's a great model. It's something that 5 years from now you will see judges who are skilled, trained, and totally committed to this type of a court. And as the chief judge, I will certainly be promoting that, having regard to just how successful this court has been.
You mentioned last week about how she was pushing her buttons.
So we're able to see people very soon after the incident, very soon after they've been charged and into court, when they're really ready to take responsibility and begin a treatment program.
Getting a project like Homefront started is no small task and requires some major rethinking of how domestic violence is addressed. It also requires all levels of government, courts, police, and the community to make the commitment to make it happen.
The single, perhaps most important factor that made this project work is that those that decided that this was going to happen were powerful people, senior people, people that can make the decisions and do the changes that are necessary and do them quickly.
And we all decided to put our individual kind of territories and beliefs aside to say what's in the best interest of the people we need to serve. And when people kind of put that lens on, magic started to happen in the room.
Clearly, Homefront brings new meaning to the words collaboration and commitment. Reducing recidivism by 2/3 is outstanding. Such success rates are inspiring and makes people wonder if the concept of Homefront can dramatically change society.
When you provide this kind of an environment for the family, don't we all win as a society?
To bring in an idea like this and have it embraced by so many people is amazing.
It's one of those tangible things that you can look at and say that I actually was involved in a collaboration that actually has impacted people's lives.
And the most important one, in some ways, to me personally, is in the lives of the children. And I always tear over when I think of them. Because children raised in homes of domestic violence have so little chance to lead productive lives.
Just unmute Maggie.
So that was just a brief introduction into our very, very early stages at Homefront, when we had champions within the community and the justice system and philanthropists and government who really came together for that common vision and goal. And really to this day, I can say we have not veered from that intentional commitment and vision. But now what I'll bring to your attention here is a slide that really shows where we are now and how the process has evolved over the last 23 years. I bring your attention to the pre-court side. This is where Homefront sits. Homefront is the what's next after charges have been laid in a domestic violence incident. To do this, again, we need to work closely with police, justice, and community agencies. After a 911 call is made and charges are laid, the Calgary Police send the 24-hour reports to Homefront. Within 72 hours, Homefront is attempting contact with the identified victim on the file, providing risk assessment and safety planning and referrals to increase their safety and mitigate their risk. We help the victims understand the justice process and provide their voice before the court, which prior to Homefront really wasn't happening. Now I'm going to move to the center of the slide where it shows our court portion. And here we have our early case resolution discussions. So every single matter that comes into the specialized domestic violence court has early case resolution discussions. And again, those discussions happen around the table between the prosecutor, the police officer, the probation officer, Homefront, and defense. Because really the hope is that we're crafting a solution that provides a way to not have these families back in the justice system. So to create healthy families. Really, Homefront walks the victim through the process from the inception of the charge through the end of an offender's probation order. We provide community resources, referral supports, and again, safety planning. Victims don't need to attend. They don't have to take time off from work. They don't have to get childcare. We update the victim on every file every single time the offender is seen in court. And every time we have that touch point, we're checking on their well-being and their safety. And we do this in real time. Homefront staff are located at our main office, co-located with our police partners and our Crown partners, and of course at the courthouse, where we sit 5 days a week in the specialized domestic violence court. And it only hears domestic violence files. And we also sit in the in Alberta's first Indigenous court as well, providing support to victims. So now I move to the far right of this slide, which is the post-court section of our work and intervention. Here, the offender is now mandated into treatment because treatment is critical to, again, the success of creating healthy families. It is part of our continuum of response. It is developed over the years. And again, we started in docket, and we realized that with intentional questions and listening to our clients and looking at our data, and we identified the gaps in service. And one was, we're really missing a trial component here. So we were doing a really good job at the docket stage, but then we were losing our victims at trial because we were providing no support. So we developed a trial component. And then subsequent to the trial component, we developed this post-court where offenders go into treatment. And that created our partnership with Alberta Health Services. And Alberta Health Services provides the funding for the mandated treatment. And we have 3 identified agencies in Calgary that take on all the mandated treatment. And while probation is monitoring the offenders, of course, it could be domestic violence counseling, it could be mental health, addictions, it could be parenting, it could be a number of conditions being monitored by probation. But Homefront then is doing the partner safety checks during the mandated treatment to, again, make sure that the victims are feeling safe, if they're needing any resources, and that they're taken care of while our probation and police and treatment are looking at the behavior of the offender. So we believe that you can't really work with one side of the equation and expect to create healthy families. And I think that's the key to how this really very integrated and collaborative work creates healthy families and has been successful. Through our integrated response, identifying the areas of strength of our justice and community partners, it does allow for less service duplication. Victims don't have to tell their stories over and over again, and they're not re-victimized. Again, the goal is always asking the questions, how do we create healthy families and eliminate domestic violence? So we just wanted to share with you that the Homefront itself is an internationally recognized, research-validated best practice model. In this slide, we see in the top picture, it's delegates from the Ukraine. We had the privilege of them attending Calgary and staying with us for a week each time. First in February of 2019 and again in November of 2019. And they took all the information from Homefront and our partners and brought it back to the Ukraine to start replicating the model. We also, in the bottom picture, had delegates from Japan, and that was back in 2018. More recently, we had visitors from Australia and the UK. We have interest from all across Canada. And we know that the work is not static, it's ever changing. Meeting our clients' needs, it's just crucial for us to identify gaps and ask the right questions and bring the right partners to the table in order to provide the best service delivery to the families we serve. So now I'm going to pass it over to Justin, and he's going to explain a little bit more about that.
Thanks, Maggie. So in 2016, we created a heat map to really help understand the reach of Homefront services and where our clients live. As you can see clearly, there are no bounds when it comes to domestic violence. It affects all communities and demographics. Sadly, the pattern remains here each year, with domestic violence being a prevalent issue. We know domestic violence remains silent in our communities, and it's still grossly underreported. A big reason why Homefront receives international attention is for the mere fact that this is a devastating worldwide issue, and Homefront is seen as part of the solution needed to counteract domestic violence. When we look at the cost of domestic violence, we estimate around $15,000 per incident, and this is a very conservative number. This only accounts for one police attendance, one court appearance, a night stay at a shelter. This doesn't include ongoing costs related to the long-term impacts of trauma and domestic violence. Homefront's intervention resulted in an 83% reduction in first-time offenders not reoffending 3 years post Homefront's intervention. When we include chronic habitual offenders, that number is 75%. So a 75% reduction in reoffense rates overall. When we think of only just looking at the first-time offenders, we know that on average, we are able to create a cost avoidance of more than $27 million per year to our systems. Our model really is lean, it's efficient, and it has been proven to be effective. Through our work with international stakeholders and even closer to home with rural communities in Alberta, we know that the Homefront model cannot simply be duplicated as it functions here in Calgary. It's less about replicating the model and more about adapting the model. So for the model like Homefront to exist elsewhere, we really do need to think about the cultural expectations of the community it's going to be used in, the economic realities, and consider resources and relationships that already exist or not within the different communities. So through this work, we have defined 3 essential pillars of the Homefront model that no matter where you live in the world, from Japan to Ukraine, from Nova Scotia to high level, you can implement this anywhere. We're going to talk about those 3 core pillars today. I'm going to stop sharing our slideshow now, and I'm going to hand it back over to Maggie to dive a little bit deeper into the first 2 pillars, which is relationships and risk assessment.
Thank you, Justin. So the 3 R's, it's really truly what we're grounded in. Our strength within our position as a tiny nonprofit is that we are independent. We can ask the hard questions that sometimes, that we don't have the red tape that sometimes exists in the larger systems. We break down barriers, we bring people together, and by doing so, we eliminate siloed solutions and thinking. We keep our clients' information safe, so it's not directly accessible to the offenders. We leverage community services, bring all the information to the table, ensuring that the families are receiving the most appropriate and best suited connections that will aid in their recovery. We allow both the victim and the offender to move through this process and get the support they need to move beyond domestic violence. Through coordinating our partnerships towards a common purpose, we reduce service duplication and we create efficiencies. One result of our relationships is that our victim engagement increases from a coordinated justice and community response. We increase the public's confidence in the justice system, and we hold offenders accountable. It helps us to identify new partnerships when they're needed. It builds capacity. And we're closing gaps by sharing our expertise and our perspectives, which again helps us create efficiencies and serve our clients better. One major priority of Homefront and our partners is risk assessment. Risk assessment is critical to the work we do. Homefront staff are all trained in risk assessment tools, safety planning, suicide intervention, they're trauma informed, and they receive training related to equity, diversity, and inclusion. Risk assessment increases victim safety and informs our program development. And I'm going to share with you an example from our high risk management initiative. So Homefront's High Risk Management Initiative, Homefront is the coordinating body for over 12 agencies that sit around the table. It includes police, probation, prosecutors, parole, corrections, treatment, children's services, the YW Education, Alberta Supports, Alberta Health Services, and psychiatry. What the HRMI initiative is we identify the top 20 to 25 offenders most likely to commit domestic homicide. With all of these agencies around the table, we intensively case manage the offender and the victim. We have an established process for coming on and off this list, and sometimes a file can be monitored for up to 4 years. But I'm going to share with you how, you know, everybody was at the table, we were doing things right, but it was an example that really highlighted a gap in how we were serving our clients. So on our HRMI list, again, I said we have the top 20 to 25 offenders most likely to commit homicide. And there was an HRMI offender who had been sentenced to penitentiary time. So he's doing his time in his penitentiary, and all along he's making it very clear that whenever he gets out, he is going to kill his victim. Didn't say it once, twice. There wasn't a person on the file that didn't know that this was his intention. So all of a sudden we hear that there was an offender who escaped from the penitentiary. And thankfully, because we had our MOU with the 12 agencies around the table, or at that time it would have been 11, a phone call was made to police. Police then set into our information sharing sort of process. Police called Homefront, Homefront went, we moved the victim from her current location. And so by the time this offender made it down from the penitentiary, he couldn't find the victim. And we moved her to safety. He was rearrested, and then he was brought back to the penitentiary. But my reasoning for sharing this is we were scratching our heads wondering why. Like, how could this happen? How could this, such a high-risk offender for domestic homicide, be in a minimum security setting and just be able to walk out? So I always say, never underestimate the power of a lunch. So we brought our parole, our probation, our CPS and Homefront and corrections partners to the table. And we just started talking about this one example. And what we came to realize is, even though the 11 agencies at that time around the table were gathering incredible amounts of data on the offender, on the victim, what we found is that there was just a small amount of information from the sentencing judge that went up to the penitentiary for the parole officers to go off of. And we were sharing in our conversation with the parole officer that, well, but we do all of this work down here. So now, as you can imagine, that MOU extends from parole to corrections, to justice, to police, to our community partners, all the way down, that intensively case manage both the victim and the offender. So it really is about being, having the ability to ask the hard questions, to always be client-centric, whether you're focused on the offender or the victim, asking those questions that really serve those individuals and those families, that keep them safe and mitigate the risk, and move them to healthier futures. Relationships are critical to the effectiveness of the process and extend beyond the partners, and help create efficiencies on our timelines of response as well. So all of this leads to our last R, which is results. So I'm going to turn it over to Justin.
Thanks, Maggie. And I do love that saying, never underestimate the power of a lunch. And I think this is perfect timing because after our presentation, I believe it's lunch. So the results is the third pillar of the Homefront model. And we've highlighted a few of the results, like reducing reoffense rates and ensuring victim safety, increasing offender accountability. But we want to talk about the three elements of how we create results. So the first element is really using a data-driven approach. Using a data-driven approach helps us make informed decisions and improve service delivery for our clients. We do have a robust data collection repository. We collect data from police, justice system, and community to really understand the client's journey. This helps us paint a clear picture and gain a deep understanding of the systems we're working within and the client's experience from inception of the charge until the end of the offender's probation order. I don't think we've mentioned, but annually we serve around 4,000 clients. So after 23 years, that's a lot of data that we can use to inform our service delivery. And we do that. So we use our data to inform service delivery and client outcomes. It helps us identify new partnerships. It also helps us increase accountability, not only for ourselves and our organization, but for our partners as well. A good example of how we use data to improve client outcomes happened during the pandemic. So during the early days of the pandemic, our data told a story that we had never seen before. It was at times really overwhelming to understand the changes and challenges before us. Within the first month, we noticed that text messaging with clients increased by 400%. Further evaluation showed that a majority of our clients were co-isolated with the accused and did not have a safe place to talk with their case manager. Essentially, this data enabled us to quickly respond to this trend and ensure that all of our case managers had the tools and training required to maintain relationships with their clients during this time. Homefront is fortunate to have information sharing agreements that enables us to collect cross-sector data to improve our results, but we know not everyone has access to this type of data, which brings me to the second element of creating results, which is asking great questions. Identifying the data you need starts with asking great questions. We use Homefront's pillars of relationship and risk to help focus the questions we're going to ask. For example, we asked how the pandemic would impact client engagement, how it would impact severity of abuse and levels of risk. It's through this lens that we monitored and worked to understand the increase in crisis interventions we were seeing during the pandemic. In 2019, we had 19 crisis interventions, and in 2020, we had over 300. We define a crisis intervention as a domestic incident in progress or suicide intervention. It's through this work, using our data and the lens of Homefront, sorry, my phone is ringing. It's through this work that we found a correlation between the ease mandates and the restrictions and the increased reports of crisis interventions required. So this enabled us to anticipate and address increased demand on our services so that we were more adaptable when we knew there was going to be eased restrictions. The final element of the pillar is embracing change together. So we know that client needs and risk levels can change rapidly, and we must respond accordingly. The way we communicate, build relationships, and access help are changing as our community resources. While progress has been made, there is still a lot of work ahead to better serve and honor the experience of equity-deserving communities. We know that effective change comes from working together, and collaboration is key to our ability to embrace change with all partners contributing to that change. In 2021, Homefront partnered with Alberta Health Services to evaluate the court mandate programs and their impact on completion and reoffense rates. Preliminary results suggest that the longer it takes for an individual to enter treatment, the less likely they are to complete treatment. This work emphasizes the importance of timely intervention. And with partnerships like this, we're better prepared to create change as we have the evidence to improve the systems we work within. The third pillar of results is really about asking good questions, using evidence and data to find solutions and embrace change together. As a final note, we will be sharing the mandated treatment evaluation and our lessons learned about the pandemic after this conference. And I'll also mention that if you're ever in Calgary, we do welcome visitors and we're happy to give you a tour. Also, if there's a counterpart in Calgary that you would be interested in discussing the treatment program or specialized domestic violence court in more detail, we're happy to make introductions for you. Thank you.
So thank you, Justin. This concludes our presentation. And if you have an interest in looking at Homefront's website, go to homefrontcalgary.com. And now we'd just like to open it up to any questions if anybody has any. Thank you.
So again, just to reiterate for anyone who has any questions, well, first off, thank you so much, Justin and Maggie, for a very, very interesting presentation and certainly some established but ongoing groundbreaking work that's happening here and is certainly inspiring change across what you rightly identified as an international issue. So kudos to you. So the just the question, if anyone has any questions for Maggie or Justin, there's a couple of ways you could do that. Certainly add your question to the Q&A piece, or if anyone's willing, they can raise their hand, which is willing to speak and willing to speak. So I'll push that over. I guess while we're waiting for any other questions to arise, I did find it very, very interesting in terms of, again, I'm just reflecting on my own experience in healthcare, that the model of care that we really practice in is really from an early intervention lens. And that seemed to be something that was really critical. And again, I'm reflecting on that very first presentation today, where there was this significant gap in terms of when people are connected with services as opposed to when they actually need them. And I wondered, in that vein, like Justin, you mentioned you kind of have, a data collection system that kind of provides a bit of a feedback loop. And I wondered if if you can highlight other experiences that might have informed, with the volume of data that you've probably collected over the years, that kind of allows you to be able to kind of adjust your services, if you collect over many years, that you can adjust your services on the front end of care to kind of continually improve to provide that access and support.
Absolutely. Yeah, so our data, we really do collect it in real time because it's connected to our case management system. When we look at, the pandemic did provide a great example because it really was a stress test on our systems. And we moved to a scale up, scale down system. So within our service delivery spectrum, we're able to reallocate resources and staff to ensure that we're able to keep up with an influx. So for example, when we say 4,000 people a year, that's not a steady stream of individuals coming. It can be 10 new files one week and 80 new files another week. So by using our data, we're able to monitor those trends and understand it. Like within the example of the pandemic, we were able to anticipate, okay, Alberta is going to be open for summer. We're probably going to have a huge influx of individuals coming through, right? So it just better prepared us to really use the data in action and put it to work for us and inform our service delivery, even just as an organization, how we organize that.
And you know what, I'll just add to that, as a result, again, of the pandemic and people's struggles with mental health and the level of isolation that happened during the pandemic, Homefront, again, is partnering with Alberta Health Services and our treatment partners, and we're doing a mental health diversion project. So truly supporting individuals coming into the justice process in domestic violence cases, where truly it is their mental health that is precipitating the act of violence, and wanting to then support them better through that process and into, giving them more tools from a mental health perspective.
Wonderful. It speaks, Justin, to your comment earlier about embracing change together, I think was the term that you used. And I think that's been a theme we've seen throughout the morning and throughout this conference. So I'll put it out there again if anyone has any last questions before we break for lunch. Just again emphasizing Justin's point to say great questions are kind of what lead us forward together, but That being said, we'll also embrace the value of lunch, right? And while we're not necessarily in the same room together, I think we'll obviously have a lot to digest, hopefully food-wise, but also intellectually through the many pieces of knowledge that we've gained over the last few hours. So thank you, Justin and Maggie, for your time today. Again, we've learned a lot, and certainly it sounds like if you're in Calgary, you've got partners in crime there that are happy to help. If you want to visit and learn more, that's available to any of us. So we'll take the opportunity to break for lunch. Thank you in particular to all our speakers. We've learned a lot, and certainly to each and every one of you who are taking the time out of what we are all very busy schedules and learning and together. So we will be back, I believe, at 2:15. And we'll have one more presentation, and then we kind of have a choose your own adventure set of presentations for the last part of the day. So thank you all. Enjoy your lunch, and we will see you in a little over an hour.
Great. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.